programme this morning, we're going to look more at boat choice and try and give people some thoughts on how they might embark on their boat selection journey. We'll be having a panel discussion on things to think about when you're looking at a Bluewater boat, and then after that we've got a presentation for you about key things to think about when you're planning a refit on your boat. So this morning is very much about boat choice and boat selection. So we've called this first section what to look for in an offshore cruising boat. And I would say with as many people in the room we'll probably get as many opinions, but that's good. And hopefully what you might take away from today is some kind of focus on what it is that matters to you in your cruising, rather than necessarily what other people tell you should do. So we're trying to give you a lens to there's lots of things in the mix, and all the private boats down on the dock there, all those owners have been through that process and ended up with the boat they've got. Now it doesn't mean their boat is perfect, but it enabled them to go and do the sailing that they've enjoyed. So again, keep focusing on that, that's the important thing, and hopefully we'll give you a lens in which to focus on some of the key things that matter most to you, which may be very different from things that matter to your neighbours. So many boats to choose from. How do we start to find the right one? It's good to have the guys with us. We've got Alan, who's the senior broker here at Berthon. Alan gets to advise an awful lot of people on how to start their process. So you probably are expert at filtering people's views and people's aspirations into what might make a suitable boat for them. And then joining Alan, we've got Nigel Wilkinson, who's professional yacht deliverers. Nigel and his team get to sail an awful lot of boats for people in different parts of the world and different times of year, different shapes and sizes of boats. So Nigel hopefully is going to give you the benefit of his experiences in how they found moving some of these boats and what they like to sail and live on. And then Mike Downing, who was with us yesterday. Mike's been through the process. He's sailed the Atlantic and then changed his boat and went on and sailed around the world. So Mike's able to give us the benefit of he's been through the process that all of you are about to embark on or maybe have embarked on. So hopefully between the three of you we can pull out some good ideas and some thoughts to kind of get people started on their journey. Do feel free to chip in and ask questions. It's a panel discussion, so you're all very welcome to ask the panel their opinions. I would stress it's very much about opinions today. There's lots of different views, and I wouldn't like to say that one is right or wrong, but it's, again, hopefully you can focus on the things that matter most to you. Alan, I'm going to start with you if I may. Obviously you get people that come into your office and say, I want to buy a boat. Now, that covers a very broad subject. How do you kind of focus in on what's important to them to kind of guide people into what might help them? What are the kind of questions you make them think about to start their boat search process, assuming they haven't already?
Well, it's obviously, I've been selling boats now for about 12 years with Berthon, so in that time there's very few types and brands and rigs and configurations of yachts that I haven't come across. So we take a very consultative approach with the client that comes in, and it'll be very much a question of sitting down with them and first of all finding out what type of sailing it is they plan to do. One of the obvious parameters there is budget, and then it's the requirements. Cruise size. Is it a couple? Is it single-handed sailing? Is it with the family and the dog? So those things will dictate. They will start to drive you in a direction of a particular type of or genre of boat, if you like. And then it's very much a question of then narrowing down. I know within that, of course, there will be personal preferences as well. Some folks will be very focused on aft cockpit, some folks will be very focused on centre, in-mast rigging, or in-mast furling, conventional mains. So once you've sort of narrowed the field to the sort of the model, if you like, or the style of yacht that they want, then it's a question of then starting to refine the tastes and requirements that they will have then within that individual yacht.
Would you say that because there are pros and cons for most shapes and sizes of boats, how do you start the process of deciding what's going to be most important? For example, things like in-mast furling, there's strong views for and against that. So is it just someone has a strong personal opinion, that's it? Or would you start talking to people about sail handling systems and being double-handed? Is that... Would you advise people to think about that kind of thing to begin with? What's most important and how do they set the priorities?
People will very often come at this process with a certain amount of sort of preconceived ideas, and actually sometimes through the process of talking to people, you'll find that actually they've maybe disted an idea on hearsay quite often, or dare I say it, sort of talk in the yacht club, oh, don't go near those. And actually, when you investigate it further, we might then try to turn them around on that and say, well, actually, no, you should consider this, because if it's not something you researched, and given your requirements, actually, that one item, in-mast furling, I suppose, is a classic example of that, because I think an awful lot of people have that sort of, oh, well, it jams. If you look at most larger 45-foot plus modern cruising boats nowadays, they're almost universally in-mast. They're very robust systems. The sail technology has come on a long way as well. And there's an element of safety in that, because you could argue that an in-mast sail is often easier to handle with a short crew than a conventional fully battened. So I think it's always down to the individuals and what their particular requirement is.
Mike, I'm going to bring you in on this one. You've been through the process twice. We were talking earlier and you said that your first boat was very much directed because you knew you wanted to do that kind of sailing, but it was a budget constraint. But having then done ocean sailing, you changed your boat. Do you want to just talk us through the process of why you landed on the style of boat you had, and what you then thought about changing that when you did planning for you around the world?
We'd had aft cockpit boats, small ones. We had a 26-footer and then went up to 29-footer. And we wanted to try and do the Atlantic circuit, and so we were looking for something a bit bigger. And so we were looking around the 36-footers, and we looked at centre cockpits, and we thought this is for us. We thought that we would like it. We liked the fact that you've got that separate aft cabin, and I think that as well, in terms of having now had two centre cockpit boats, found that we were just more comfortable with it in a sense. I must admit, when I get on a boat now that's an aft cockpit boat, I thought, where's the bow? Because it's so much further forward when you're on a centre cockpit boat. You tend to forget the bit behind you. I mean, it just comes along behind you. So we started off with the Corsair, which was the 36-foot, and it worked really well. We liked it. We liked the volume, etc. And so when we came to do the next one, we were looking to see if we could get another centre cockpit boat. I think we did look at some aft cockpit boats like Bowman and things like that, but after the first one, it worked so well that we decided that we just wanted to try and get something bigger, stronger, that had all sorts of other things that we hadn't got on the other one, and go for that. And just on the sales issue as well, as you do, you produce a list of all the things you would like to see on your ideal boat. And when we went for the Corsair, it had virtually all those things, except that it had in-mast furling, which I didn't really want. But it had everything else, so we went with it. And so we had the boat for a while and did the Atlantic crossing in it, Atlantic circuit in it. And it worked well. It enabled you to reef easily from the cockpit. But I never really liked, this is a personal opinion, I never really liked the cut of the sail, and wanted to go back to the sort of slab reefing, three reef slab. And with our next boat, again, with your checklist of things, we found one that did have that. So we actually went back from the furling to that, and we're pleased that we did. I am certainly very pleased. It did mean that we had to go up to the mast. We got granny bars on that, and once you're in those granny bars, you feel ever so comfortable and confident. So it wasn't an issue. But yeah, basically, if you looked at the Hallberg-Grassi 42, which we've got, compared with the Wesley 36, it's virtually identical inside, but one is bigger and stronger.
It's a couple of points that you mentioned there. I want to kind of bring in the other panelists on. One was size, where we've gone from 36 to 42. So I'd like to ask the guys for their views on what they think the optimum size is for 2 to 4 people going transocean sailing. Is it just, well, it's the size my budget will buy, or should I go for the most length I can possibly get for my money, or are there other things that have come into the mix? Where would you kind of point people on that discussion?
Just one thing on that. We've found on both occasions that the boat shrinks 10 feet when you go across the Atlantic, because everything is that much bigger.
I think obviously, as you'll see from your ARC entries over the years, and I've seen from going down to Las Palmas, people, you can cross the Atlantic on, I think the smallest boat I saw once was 26 feet, which was a Nordic folk boat, but I thought it was a particularly brave choice. I would have said entry level, in order to have enough stores, batteries, fuel, water, it will depend a little bit on the boat, but I think you're looking at sort of 38 to 42 is sort of the starting size for a couple, 4 people. After that, yes, it increases with demands of crew, family, and then the privilege of having maybe a larger budget as well can take you into that 48, 55 foot realm as well. In which case it does essentially the same job, but does it in a lot more comfort, and the extended waterline means reduced passage times and so on. So the more you creep up, there are advantages in terms of capacities and passage times, really.
The other comment that Mike made that I thought was interesting was you had a fixed idea on boat 1 about sail handling. You then changed your mind on boat 2. So there's a compromise there in terms of changing boats. And I just kind of wanted, Nigel, your view on how should people best come up with their priority list. It's you can have 15 different conversations in the club bar or on the dockside about what's best. So things like sail handling has an effect on performance, but does performance really matter when you're a cruising boat? Is it, as Mike said, it's that 10 foot of extra house? So which is more important, and is it just down to personal preference? And you sail kind of different styles of boats, and would you rate one, say, comfort above performance, or how would you put those factors?
I mean, I think the sort of primary sort of start point is how you yourself can sail the boat. If it's going to be a couple's boat or a couple with friends, then that's going to affect the choice of both the size of boat and potentially the way you then going to sail it will affect the choice of sail handling system. I'm slightly biased, I suppose, because I'm just under 6'5". I feel more comfortable on bigger boats. I haven't sailed anything less than a 50-footer for the past 3 years, which is so I've become used to being on bigger boats. And as Alan said, once you get a larger waterline, they are slightly quicker. They're usually slightly more stable. They will handle bigger seas a lot better. I've been fortunate to cross the Atlantic in a 62-foot boat and a 65-foot boat, and it was fairly straightforward. They will handle the bigger seas. They'll handle different conditions far better than a smaller boat would in terms of comfort. And if you're doing long passage making, I think for me, being on a stable platform is fairly important. So I think it depends how you're going to run the boat, and also the type of cruising you're going to do. You know, we were talking before with Jeremy. If you are only going to do passages to get somewhere else, and then when you get somewhere else, stay there for a long period of time, that may be going to affect the style of boat that you choose. You know, if you want a large sunbathing platform and you're not really bothered about performance going across an ocean, then that might affect which style of boat you choose. If you're going to go round and round the world, which some of our clients do, and we end up bringing boats back for them from some far-flung reaches of the world, then you might want more of a boat that's going to make passage making that much more comfortable and straightforward. So I think these are the sort of primary considerations. How are you going to manage the boat? Who is going to sail it? Is it a couple? Is it a couple with friends? Is it a family? And then how easy do you want to make that handling of the boat? For me personally, I don't think there's much of an issue that in-mast furling or in-boom furling, if it's set up correctly, makes sail handling very, very straightforward. It can be done single-handed often. I mean, we on passage making, we normally stand single watches, and if we've got in-mast furling systems, we can normally do sail adjustments ourselves, single-handedly. So that's the way we run our passages. And
can I just ask you, you mentioned comfort being important at 6'5". Do you struggle to find a bunk you can lie down in sometimes on a boat?
yeah. Diagonal usually works somewhere.
On that subject, can I just ask your opinions on what makes a good sea berth, and why is it important to have a sea berth on a passage making boat?
It's important because, and I was speaking to a couple of people yesterday about the fact they wanted to do single-handed, sail as a couple. And the important thing is that you are able, when you go off watch, to get decent rest. And so that when you wake up, you are back on watch again. If you're sailing as a two-up, that's the way you've got to work the system. For me, the most comfortable sea berth is one that you tend not to roll around in too much. You get jammed in somewhere, and you can usually find a fairly comfortable position. I prefer to be low down, just forward of the mast, if I want to get some really good sleep. Although I did sleep on a bunk that was aft and basically a coffin. But once you're in, you didn't move around. I had to actually crawl headfirst into it. But once I was in, I was fine. Getting out was a bit of a problem again, and I wouldn't have liked to get out there in a particular rush. But again, a very, very comfortable berth once you were in.
Mike, can I just ask you about, does the way you use the boat in terms of where you sleep and how you live on it change between when you're on passage and when you're what I call cruising or anchor and living somewhere? So living on a boat versus moving it, how does that change how you use the boat or how you operate it?
Yeah, quite significantly, in fact, because we obviously, when we're at anchor, we sleep in the aft cabin, and we do have a lee cloth in the aft cabin, so you could sleep in there, but we don't. We have a berth, a sea berth in the saloon, and that does several reasons for that, but it has some benefits. One of the benefits is that all of a sudden we've got a double berth at the back that we can put things, which gives us extra storage, which is quite handy. And with the lee cloth up, it stays most of the time where it's supposed to be. But the reason as well that we do it is that obviously there's only two of us, and the person who is on watch can see the person who's sleeping down there. And if there is a need to get someone up quickly, then it's very easy to do. It's also that particular sea berth is a tight fit, again with lead cloths, and so you can get in there and it doesn't matter what the sea is doing. And that is behind the mast on the port side, and it's a nice berth. So we do change our arrangement quite considerably when we are at sea.
Nigel, can I ask, have you had to move many catamarans around the world?
As a company, we move 3 or 4 a year.
Because a lot of people say that cats are just for living on and you can't sail them. You got any opinions on what they're like going across an ocean?
I think it does depend on the catamaran, for sure. We are currently bringing a catamaran across from the Caribbean, and it's not moving very fast. It's a big catamaran, it's a big heavy catamaran, and the sail plan on it doesn't really mean that it's a sailing catamaran. It's a motorboat with a stick on it, and it's not performing particularly quickly. But it's doing it very safely and securely, and the guys are very comfortable on board. It's an enormous bit of kit to sail on. Previous to that, we'd moved Discovery Magic across the Atlantic, and that performed very well. That was set up as a sailing catamaran, and she was very, very fast.
Alan, I might ask for your views on mono-hulls versus multi-hulls. Where would you guide people to thinking they might go one way or the other? Have you got strong views? Or what are the pros and cons, really, I suppose, is the question.
It's almost client-led, that one, because I think it's probably, if you just draw a poll in here now, that 90% plus or 99% or thereabouts are going to be monohull sailors. Would that be right?
Let's just do that. Put your hands up if you are owning or planning to own a monohull. Okay. Put your hands up if you own or are planning to own a catamaran. Okay. So that's about an average split, I would say. Next question then. Monohull sailors. Are you possibly considering a multi-hull, or would you? So anyone who considers themselves a monohull sailor, how many of you might consider a multi-hull? Okay. Catamaran owners. How many cat owners would consider going back to a monohull? It's quite an interesting statistic, I think. That's a very unscientific poll. But, yeah.
Yeah, just a quick comment on that. I had the same discussion with one of our most experienced skippers, who, up until he sailed his first catamaran, only ever sailed monohulls. Now his preference is catamarans, quite straightforward, for the size, the room, and for him, upwind performance isn't really an issue. He ran a catamaran as a charter boat in the Caribbean for 17 years, but he would now, of choice, always choose a catamaran, which was surprising to me.
Interesting that you say upwind performance doesn't matter. I might just ask Mike, in terms of your 6-year cruise, a couple of questions here. One is, how often were you having to work to windward in terms of a sort of percentage of a year's sailing? And the second question related to that is, of your year on the boat, what percentage were you actually sailing it as opposed to just bimbling around and living on it? Could be unscientific and rough estimates, but the upwind. The first one is how often do you have to go upwind?
Well, we tried to avoid it, obviously, as much as we possibly could. I'm trying to think of the passages that we did. Certainly not many. I mean, the classic one.
Infrequently.
Yeah, infrequently.
Maybe up and down to New Zealand, or.
I was going to say they're not going so much down to New Zealand, but when we left New Zealand, we went up to Fiji, and we went up via the Minerva Reef, and we went into the Minerva Reef, and we were not hard on the wind, but certainly bashing into it. And we had 6 days of 3 reefs in the main, and either the staysail up or the small bit of Genoa.
Did you ever feel that you'd made the wrong choice on boat performance issues, or was it just, it's such a short trip, we're not going to worry about it?
No, I mean, that's one of the things, going back to what was said earlier, with 3 reefs in the main and the right amount of foresail up, she powered through the waves. We were doing 5.5 to 6.5 knots, sometimes 7, in maybe sort of 25 to 30 knots. I mean, she just went. Going back to the Corsair, when we left Falmouth to go across to La Coruna, we went on a 5-day forecast, which was from the north, and we thought, that's great. Within 2 days, it was on the nose. It changed. And this is back in '95, and the forecasting wasn't quite as good as it is these days. The waves were quite big. We got up to gale force winds on the nose, and the seas got up a bit. and she would build up speed and then hit a big wave and almost stop. And then she would build up speed again and get going, and then hit another wave and almost stop. And I think we had 2 days where the average speed was 2.5 knots. It was a struggle. With the bigger, heavier boat, similar to the situation going up from New Zealand, she just powered through it. We had water on both decks running for 6 days, but she certainly went through it. So that was a significant.
But it's interesting that you had to think quite hard to think of a passage where you've done that.
We did. That was the one that stands out. Thinking of other.
So would you say the majority of the time you're really not doing that kind of sailing?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, we geared the boat up and changed the rig to have the double-headed rig, we had a cutter stay as well, which we used to just put our storm jib on. But in Australia, this is silly. We would like to use. We got staysail. We never put the staysail up because it meant the sort of conditions that you wanted to put the staysail up. You thought that, well, I'll use a storm jib instead. So to do it in Australia, we actually changed the cutter stay for a furling gear. So we've actually got 3 furling gears, and that gives us so many different combinations. With the 3 reefs in the main. You've got 3 reefs in the main, you've got 3 different sails forward, so you've got 9 different combinations just to start with, let alone how you can reef the individuals. And that made a big difference into what we could do. But as a result of that, saying that, the reason is that we've got 2 poles. This is after our first experiences. I ended up, when we went across the Atlantic, poling out the headsail, only to find the wind shifted, and we had to take the pole down and put it up on the other side, and then the wind would shift. If I ever do this again, I'm having 2 poles, and that's what we did. 2 poles, 2 furling gears. We've got a 4-guy, half-guy topping lift for each of the pole. The 4-guy and half-guys can be controlled from the cockpit. The topping lift is on the mast, so I do that bit, get the pole up, and Liz is in the cockpit with the 4.5-guy to get it where I want it. Once you've got those 2 sails out, then you don't need the main. In a lot of cases, the main gets in the way, so take it down. And then whoever is, she flies when she's in that configuration, whoever's on watch can reef. If you, without the other disturbing the other one, you can take the sail, ease the sail in, both of them to try and balance it to the point where you then get rid of one. You've still got the one left over, and then you get rid of that and use the staysail to get that. And one person can do all of that from the cockpit.
Good point. I'd like to move the subject on a bit as time is moving on. Alan, budget for buying a boat. It might just be how deep's your wallet in your pocket, but I think the question I want to ask is, realistically, what's the minimum you should spend to get a boat that's going to be capable of doing offshore passages? And in that, with some modest degree of comfort. So we're not going to do it on Rod Heichel's 20-foot hard chine plywood boat. Well, I certainly wouldn't.
Again, it's a very difficult question because it is down to an individual's budget, and some folks are massively enterprising in what they undertake. They complete extensive voyages on really, quite a tight budget. I guess if you look in terms of what we have here at the moment, entry level in terms of what we have on the gantries there's a Nicholson 40. It's ketch rigged. It's got steering gear on the back. It's got a good instrumentation package on it. And with the addition of 1 or 2 toys on that boat's currently asking, I think, about £50,000. So with 1 or 2 additions to that boat, there's a boat that could probably take you, that could quite happily take you across the world's oceans. But the other end of the scale is, Oyster 72 sitting down at the end of Deep B pontoon. So I think it is really, I think the average, or well, I wouldn't say there is an average, but to go off and do it with a good inventory on a good size of boat, with a good level of equipment and so on, you're probably entry level 100, 150, and then upwards from that.
What? There's two related questions on that. One is the cost of refitting. If I'm buying a boat that's 30 plus years old, I'm going to have to budget some money to refit that. What kind of very rough rule of thumb guidance would you give people for what you might need to spend on a 30-year-old boat to get it ocean ready to go off again?
Right. That'll often come down to the individual boat, because it's rare that you're going to come across a boat where you have to do everything. So, you'll find an example of a boat, and there'll always be some plus points with every boat, and there'll always be minus points. So whether it's a question of having to pull the rig and replace all the standing rigging, and then while you're at it, you'll no doubt alter that rig plan as well a little bit with the addition of extra furlers, or changing the downwind setup and so on. But 40-foot boat, what are you going to spend? You're going to spend somewhere in the region of 4 to 6k on updating standing rigging. Engines, well, again, if you were buying something, and you felt that actually we've got a 5, 6, 7 year plan or whatever, you might think, well, it would be apt to change that before we depart. So again, there's a sizable cost.
It's interesting you bring up the fact of planned length of ownership and sailing. It's coming back to sailing aspirations again, isn't it? It's making people think about what they might be doing with that boat and how long they're going to own it, which might push you in. It's interesting that Mike changed his boating requirements having done a trip. Did you having now spec'd your boat and sailed it, did you wish that you before you left, or was it just your way of sailing the boat has evolved? So in terms of, I'm looking kind of how to budget for refit here. So would you say yes, perfectly now you need to start off with the things I had, or is it very much we've changed how we sail the boat, therefore we wanted to change the boat to suit our method of sailing?
Yeah, I think that having done the Atlantic circuit in 95, 96, it turned out as it was that was a perfect shakedown, if you like, in terms of what we felt we needed. So we got the latest boat in 2005. So we had from 96 to 2005 to think about all the things that we wanted, and we have enhanced it since, but only tinkered with it in a sense. And I think that what we decided to do was right for us, and it worked. I mean, I don't think there's anything that we bought. We tended to be belts and braces, and I don't think there's anything that we bought that didn't have its day where it was fairly key and important to us.
Can I ask you one other?
Can I just
Sorry,
say a couple of things on what you were saying earlier? We two things. One on catamarans, and it was actually catamaran on the two issues. One guy bought a catamaran, a brand new catamaran, and used all his money on it, on the basis that he would get 3 or 4 years of sailing without having to spend any great money on it. And that didn't happen. And I must admit, as we've gone around and we've seen brand new boats from all manufacturers, they all require money being spent on them. So you do need to have a certain amount of reserve.
That's interesting, because that was going to be my next question, which is what's this kind of cost of ownership for cruising? We talked yesterday about the cruising budget, but in terms of running your boat for a year overseas, you've got berthing cost, insurance, maintenance. Is it the same as the amount of money you spend in the UK, or would you say it's different up or down?
With the marina fees and things in this country, it is definitely cheaper to sail overseas, especially if you are try to anchor, on which we did, and obviously when you go through the Pacific, I mean, after you leave Panama, I mean, the next marina is 5,000 miles away in Tahiti. So, unless they've changed it recently, so you're anchoring all that time. When we went to Australia, we went down to Sydney. The marina fees in Sydney they would challenge the marina fees in the Solent and around this area. So we managed to get buoys, or we found places where we could anchor for longer term, and we tried to stay out of marinas unless we needed to go in for a particular thing. So if you stay out of marinas, then your costs considerably less.
Interesting.
One thing just on the catamarans as well, we bumped into quite a few catamarans, and I know nothing really about catamarans, but we had some, certainly those that are, I don't know what the technical term is, that are built up, so you've got plenty of space under the bridge. People seemed a lot happier with those than those that were lower. Certainly had one boat where it was quite a big catamaran, a good make, can't remember what it was, and he started across the Pacific, and he was getting huge amounts of slamming going on to the extent that he thought the boat was falling apart. And another boat that was coming up behind actually stayed with him for a good week to 1 to 2 weeks, because he was scared that the boat was going to break up. It didn't. It survived, and it was great, but it wasn't very fast. We did have another catamaran where it was built up. It was built specifically for ocean crossing, and that just flew. He was always in port way before anybody else was, and it was a great success. But it was a big boat and quite an expensive one, I think. But that seemed to be key as to how much space you've got underneath your bridge to the water.
Alan, I'm going to ask you for comments. Mike mentioned spends a lot of time at anchor and avoiding marinas. So in terms of where would you guide people with suggestions for what I call cruising equipment? I'm thinking things like davits and dinghies and passerelles and that kind of stuff that's going to make a difference when you're out of marina land in the Solent. Where would you kind of point people to look at?
Well, again, it's sort of down to the individual boat and what it lends itself to do. Some aft cockpit boats may be a little bit more performance orientated. They quite obviously don't lend themselves to davits, so you're going to go on the premise that you'll be using a roll-up dinghy or or keep it on the foredeck or whatever. There's a little bit, some folks there are quite anti-davits. Purely from an aesthetic point of view, but I think in terms of just usefulness and everyday, if you're cruising and you're going to be performing that operation on a regular basis, then yeah, davits are pretty much a must. And there's also for securing the dinghy as well. You don't want it on a leash at night. I would presume, Mike, you would probably adhere to that. Yeah. So you'd rather have it up in certain places. You'd rather have the dinghy up in the davits at night. But in terms of how every boat will require optimization, and that again is down to the configuration of the boat and how it's how it's laid out and how you want it set up. It is. I think it's quite particular to the boat, really.
It's Mike.
So one thing on davits, we have davits, and we have the boat on the davits when we are coastal hopping. But for cruising, for ocean work, we certainly take it down, and it goes underneath the boom and ties down. But you will see a lot of American boats where they have their davits on an A-frame of some form, and the dinghy is right up high, and they sail across oceans with them. It scares the living daylights out of me. I wouldn't want a boat of that weight that high up. But they do it, and it means that they don't have to muck around trying to find somewhere else for it to go. But I think we struck a reasonable compromise. If you ever get on to talking about dinghies, we didn't get the dinghies right, and I can say quite a lot on dinghies if that.
Well, it's an important thing if you're going to be a cruiser. You're not in marinas, and your dinghy matters to you. So, would you like to just explain why you didn't get it right, because that's quite a key point for people to understand?
Yeah, we wanted a dinghy that we could do as I just described. So it had to be small enough to go underneath the boom when we were at sea. And so we got one. It was an Avon, no Avon Light, where the transom would fold down, and it was a rib, but the transom would fold down and let the tubes down, and it came down very small. So that was great. So it did all that we wanted to do, except that when you are anchoring, is like we say, there are places you need to go to provision. There are places, there are caves and things that you hear about that you want to go and visit that sometimes are a long way away. And that dinghy, in the slightest chop, would shit lots of water. And there are places we would have liked to have gone, but it's just not tenable with that particular dinghy. As a result, when we were in Australia, we actually sold that one, and we bought an Achilles, which is just an inflatable one. But we went the other way. We went too big, in as much as that it still fitted under the boom, which is great, but it was really too big for the davits. It was over 3 meters, and it had an aluminium floor. It was a huge 18-inch tubes, and therefore it was as dry as anything. And you could put all sorts of gear in it, no problems at all. I've got 2 scuba tanks, and they could put all that lot in it, and still playing with all that in it. So it was great, but it was just really too big to put on the davits. We did it, but you had to be careful with it.
I'm going to kind of follow up on that theme a little bit. You mentioned that you end up with a dinghy that was too big. So I'm going to ask Nigel, what are the things that annoy you on boats if they get the design wrong? So it might be like engine access, or the refrigerator being in the wrong place, or galley cupboards you can't get into. What are the real niggles? You've mentioned head height already, but are there anything else that you want to warn people that this could be a...
I think it's more about how you can move around a boat in a degree of safety and comfort, and I think the things that sort of, I said this last year, something that annoys you now, if you're on a boat for a number of weeks or months, will annoy the hell out of you by the time you're finished. So you really need to think about, if you go onto a boat and it annoys you, you think, that's really going to annoy me in the future. So that is important, to just consider what things just aren't in the right place. And I think the sort of things that you go into boats and you think, that's not quite right, where are the handhelds? Where are the handholds when you go down below? How do you move around a boat safely down below? How do you get into the heads? How do you get into the galley and wedge yourself in there so you can make up the sea, whatever? And it's just, sometimes it's a really simple thing, and you think, well, if they'd just done that, it would have been so much easier, so much better. And I think up on deck, there are certain layout things where, when you've got clear decks to walk down, it's such a luxury. And some boats are very clear decks, so you can move forward very easily. Some boats are completely opposite. You are continually stepping over fittings and fixtures, and you think, well, if they just move that somewhere else, it's not going to affect the performance of the boat. It's still going to be there, but it would be a lot easier to move around the boat. And I think those are the things that when I get on boats, if the niggles aren't there, you don't even think about them. But when they are there, they start to niggle very, very much.
Alan, I'm going to ask you the same question. What's the biggest hate or the thing that you found most awkward on a boat?
I wouldn't say it's a particular thing, but I'd say that 2 of the key areas in a boat, when you think of the boat underway as such, would be the cockpit and the galley. Galley is an area where it has to function, and it has to function when it's at an angle or it's going up and down. So a well-designed galley with good fiddles and good access. As you say, access to probably particularly things like fridges and so on. When you're trying to do it, with one hand holding on and one hand doing what it is you want to do. So that's an area that has definitely got to function. But it's also, again, some people will place higher priority on that than others, but it is a key part of the boat. Good day heads as well. That's in a position again where it's accessible when the boat is actually on the move and sailing off in a swell sort of thing.
Just allied to that, you'll go on boats and there'll be perfectly level surfaces, and you'll go on the boats on the pontoon, there'll be level surfaces. What you've got to imagine is that boat heeled at sea, and also that boat rolling at sea. And just imagine the motion of the boat and how you're then going to move around the boat. And that changes the dynamics completely. So that's really something you just got to, in your own mind, think, how is this boat going to be when it's actually heeled over, or that way? And how is it going to be when the boat's just doing that gently down the waves? And that will start to sort of give you a better understanding of how the layout of the boat's going to perform at sea, which is going to be a big chunk of what you're going to do on it. So that's quite important, really.
Mike, do you want to add to things you like about your boat the most, or niggles that you wish it didn't have?
Well, it's just a more general point, is that we've got two heads, and we had two heads on the Corsair as well. But one is across the ship, if you like, and one is fore and aft. And I think it's useful to have that, because it makes life a lot easier to have that. If you're healing, that's for sure. In terms of, I don't think we've had any significant niggles. We have a generator fitted, and it's the other side of the engine. So whenever I service it, I have to put a bit of carpet over the engine and lean over the engine. The hatch that comes off for you to change for checking the oil and all the rest of it is such that I have to do everything left-handed, and I'm not left-handed. I'm getting better at it. Wouldn't it be nice if it was the other way around? But
it's interesting that this is a boat you're very happy with. You've done lots of miles on it. There's still something that you wish you could change.
Yes. Oh, yeah. I don't think you're ever in a situation where everything is right.
I think that's a good point to end up on. Is don't get too hung up on getting it right, because there will be things even on what you consider your ideal boat that perhaps won't ever be right. Alan, do you want to finish on that?
Well, you made the comment yesterday that I don't think anyone, even if they set out tomorrow and built the boat of their dreams, and I meet clients that do that quite often, but they will still come back a few years down the line and go, if I was doing it again. So, there's an element of compromise in every boat. It's never going to be perfect, but it's a question of ticking off as many of those priorities and things that are important to you as you can.
Great. Thank you very much to all our panel, to Mike, to Alan, and to Nigel. It's been very enjoyable. Thank you.